Pleasure to have Mr. Thabo Dike with us, the Professional Officer of Future Earth of the Regional Office for Southern Africa Secretariat, hosted by National Research Foundation. Thabo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mariela. Thank you very much, Hannah. And thank you very much, Makiba, for the wonderful presentation. So I'll just be giving a brief overview of this Belmont Forum CRA on transdisciplinary research for pathways to sustainability. Unfortunately, I'm also going to say transdisciplinary a lot. So I hope we all get used to that idea. And I think when we go to the breakaway rooms, we can really panel beat this concept and really zoom into what the challenges may be and propose some of the solutions. Because I think it's critical for all of us, the Belmont Forum, Future Earth, and even the community itself, to sort of understand this concept so that we can action it. So as introduced by Mariela, my name is Thabo, working for Future Earth, Regional Office for Southern Africa, hosted at the National Research Foundation in South Africa. A social scientist by training. I saw a diplomacy question there. So back in the day, I did do a lot of science diplomacy, worked at the Department of Science and Innovation, and my work there focused mostly on the SADC region and the African Union region. Next slide, please. So I'll just provide briefly the context, the thinking and development of the call. I'll briefly go into the call itself and then highlight some of the objectives, expected deliverables, and then briefly touch on the eligibility. I know there's a presentation coming in the next session that will go deeper into those issues. So I'll just give a bird's eye view if you like. Next slide, please. Next slide, thank you. So I think as we all know, in 2015, we adopted this agenda, the 2030 development agenda. And from the work that's been done so far, there has been a lot of progress that's been made. But sadly, no country is currently on track to achieve all of the SDGs. And in Africa's case, only 3 SDGs seem likely to be achieved. So if you look at SDG 5, gender equality, Africa has the most legislators in terms of women. That sort of gives that, gives us that sort of figure, depending on the data. But that is a quantitative view, if you like. Qualitatively, if there's gender equality within our households, how is the experience at home? In South Africa currently, we're experiencing a lot of gender violence, which speaks to discrepancies between some of the information we have and qualitative information that we should still get. And another SDG that we're on track with is SDG 13 on climate action and SDG 15 on life on land. So we are doing very well. But in terms of the global view in Africa, North Africa is sort of leading in most of these SDGs. But generally, there's still a lot of progress to be made. Now, I put this next bullet here because as we sort of tackle Agenda 2030 and tackle the SDGs, we also need to think of the African Union's Agenda 2063 and what the priorities are there. And it's critical that at this stage, we take lessons from Agenda 2030 so that we can sort of have ideas and take lessons to implement and hopefully reach Agenda 2063. Next slide, please. I think you went back. Next slide. Thank you. So now in terms of the thinking and the development of the call, it's been recognized that these goals are highly ambitious and interrelated. And as Maria highlighted in her presentation, that there needs to be a systematic way that we think about this. And the Stockholm Resilience Center Wedding Cake highlights this very well. Obviously, going through the whole cake and going through the different sectors, if you like, the economy, society, and the biosphere is SDG 17, which speaks to partnerships. So through all of these spheres, there's nothing that we can achieve without addressing first the partnerships that we need to take care of. And basically what this slide says is that the economy obviously needs to feed society. But in order for society to thrive, you need a stable system. And all of these three need to speak to each other. If you have a society, as Maria highlighted, that is thriving, an economy that is thriving, but at the expense of the Earth system, then this system will collapse. So it's critical that we look at these interactions and interdependencies and identify, and as best we can, try to come up with combinations that rather produce positive impact. So that produce co-benefits and synergies. And where we can, shy away from negative tensions and contradictions. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. This is the context within which we are conceptualizing this call. We need to attack all of these SDGs in a way that speaks to each other. I've put there in the green bubble there just a highlight on the extent of data and information that we have on the SDGs in Africa. And it says 40% of the indicators in the global SDG data framework are accompanied by data in Africa. So the rest of 60%, there is no data. And that makes it very difficult for decision makers. It makes it very difficult for us to devise solutions and strategies without information. If we are to provide evidence-based solutions and provide knowledge and information for decision makers, we also need to have instruments that allow us to collect the relevant data that would allow us to have the right information so that we can devise those solutions. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. So next slide, the title. So essentially what the objectives are, is we want to encourage the production of knowledge, which contributes to the achievement of the SDGs in an integrated and cohesive manner. We want to encourage different approaches, perspectives, and scenarios. So as you would have seen from the core text, you need to come up with explicit interactions between 3 SDGs or more. I saw some of the questions already asking, which SDGs. So the question is not to put you in a corner or box you or sort of pin you into identifying certain SDGs. You need to identify interactions between any of the SDGs. But what is critical when you do identify those SDGs, and what you need to keep in mind, is the Belmont Challenge. There is a link that we will share to the Belmont Challenge, and you would see what is meant there. So it is realized and recognized that there are negative impacts that are happening in the environment, but there are also positives that are happening with ecological change. So how do we account for all of those? What are the interactions? What are the benefits? What are the trade-offs? What are the negatives? Now, in terms of themes, there's 2 sort of themes in phase 1. So we support 1 to 2 year projects. And for that and the specific arrangements around the duration of your project, you need to consult the relevant annexes. So in Future S Annex, which all of you are eligible for, if you are based in an African country, that funding is limited for a period of 1 year. So you would need to discuss amongst yourselves as a consortia how you arrange yourself if your project is intended for a 2-year period. So that support for these projects is based on the principle of 1 year to 2 year. Now, in terms of the themes, there's the creation, obviously, which is one of the objectives of this workshop, actually, is the creation of networks and communities of practice, and the other is knowledge synthesis. But in this case, it's not exclusive. So you can choose one, or the theme 1 or theme 2, or your consortia or proposal can choose both. So it's up to you in your proposal, if it makes sense to go with one or to go with both. So just a possible scenario in terms of the Bowman Challenge. You could, for example, look at the SDGs that are highlighted there, SDG 6, 13, 14, and 15. Base that as, you could have that as your basis. This is not prescriptive, it's just an example. And then you could then relate or counteract and see how this relates to all of the other SDGs. How does this relate to the economy? How does this relate to society? What are the benefits? What are the trade-offs? And then you go ahead with your proposal. Next slide, please. Next slide. So instead of just producing networks and putting consortia together, different partners, all 13 of them, and obviously the Bellman Forum, we decided that there needed to be deliverables to the work that you would be undertaking through that 12 months or 24-month period. So these are just examples of deliverables and outcomes and outputs that you can put together, but it's certainly not limited. So you would also indicate if there are things that are not covered here, please feel free to include them. But obviously, I think maybe just to go through them quickly, the synthesis and scaling up of place-based project outcomes, assessment of local indicators, pathway scenario and development using participatory approaches, inference and coherence, assessment and visualization, assessment of SDGs, and interactions across spatial scales. Next slide, please. Next slide. And this is also just a continuation of some of the deliverables, not exclusive, that you can go for, but you can definitely include one of those. Now, I think it's critical to mention, from my side anyway, that we are in the midst of this pandemic. There's different legislative and policy restrictions for people to travel. So a lot of this networking will have to be sort of digitized or, will have to take place virtually. Now, on the other hand, we are saying, stakeholders, you need to include or consider all types of stakeholders. Now, we need to also be careful of having, for example, if you say we need to include communities in disadvantaged areas, we need to include people in rural areas. Now, as you undertake that stakeholder engagement in this milieu that we're currently in, how do you then engage with people that are not easily accessible? How does the digital divide, or how is the digital divide going to play part in you coming up with a proposal and effectively in you implementing your project, with us not knowing how this situation will last or how long it will last? Next slide, please. So in terms of eligibility, so consortia supported by at least 3 participating partner organizations. Now, as you go through the Bellman Forum website and when you access the call, you'll see a list of partners and you'll also see a list of annexes. I would encourage everyone that, that is going to apply to go through that and see what the different partners are offering. For example, Future Earth is supporting African researchers in all African countries, or everyone is eligible to apply. But there are also other African countries that are supporting people from their own respective countries. South Africa is one of them. I think Ghana is another. So please go through those and see what other additional arrangements they have. For example, in the annex of Future Earth, there wouldn't be much restrictions in terms of, gender, etc. But there may be considerations in other annexes. So please have a look at that. And lastly, to state, if a partner is not highlighted in those, they may still participate, but that participation would not be counted as part of that 3. So you still, you still put them part of the proposal or of the consortia, but to reach that criteria, you need to at least 3 participating partner organizations. And lastly, I think, as already said by Makiba, highlighted, and that's why it's in red here, it needs to be transdisciplinary consortia. So you need to think about the presentation from Makiba, and we'll go deeper into this and this composition as we go into the different different breakaway sessions. So the collaborations and the partnerships must be truly done transdisciplinary. And this must be clearly indicated. So you can include researchers from social sciences, humanities, natural sciences, societal partners, decision makers, managers, etc. And all of this is anchored on the idea of co-design, co-development, and co-implementation. So it really starts at the beginning. And I think in terms of the question that was raised by the gentleman from HSRC around encountering challenges, I think when you start at this stage, at least you already start to iron out those challenges, and you're ready to start devise inclusive solutions that take care of people from different areas and different disciplines. I think that's my last slide. Next slide, please. I'm happy to take any questions that are here, and I have colleagues also from the Belmont Forum and Future Earth, I think, who can also field some of the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thabo, for the great presentation. Feel free, everyone who has questions, to raise your hands. I don't see anyone at the moment. Okay, we have Peter. Yeah, Peter Van Gey, please.
Yeah, thank you so much for that presentation. My concern is in regard to 40%, no, 60% of the provided solutions do not have evidence. I just wanted to get the clarification, where are these solutions coming from, these 60%? Because I believe that if any solution is coming from science, then there is data, there is analysis, and there is the result and recommendation. So where are these solutions coming from? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. I think what's critical is that although there are 17 SDGs, there are 169 targets and 232 indicators. And those indicators span across, we're going from the level of communities, we then go to the level of, provincial offices, local municipalities. And as I said, when I mentioned that information asymmetry, although the work is being done, it's not always easy to capture the work, detail it, codify it, and then put it forward to the relevant office. So granted, the work is being done. And I think a lot of work is being done. I think, there needs to be more attention to the informal sector. There needs to be more attention to communities on the ground. I'm sure, and I agree with you, the work is there, it's being done, it's just not being captured appropriately. And I think as a continent, we need to start coming up with ways and mechanisms of collecting data and information, not just at a provincial level, but deeper even at community, municipal levels.
Thank you, Thabo. We have Dr. Ibrahim. He has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation, Mr. Thabo. I'm still, based on your slides, the last slide you showed, you demonstrated 3 categories of requirement or requisite we want to apply it, for the when proposal or when proposing a project. I made mention of the natural science, social sciences, and the individuals. So does the other classes of science involve or not? For instance, when you talk of the environment issue, you will have the built environment and the natural environment. And then when you talk of the sciences, when you talk of the natural sciences, you also have health sciences. So is it a deliberate omission, or you have or there's a movement into it? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Ibrahim. I think I heard you correctly, but no discipline is excluded. All disciplines qualify, all SDGs may be interrogated. Critical to interrogating the SDGs is how you also respond to the Belmont Forum challenge, but no one is excluded.
Thank you.
We also have Michael Kuba. Can go ahead.
Yeah, yes. In one of the earlier introduction, I remember they talked of local solutions, and they were talking about things to do with indigenous knowledge. How is it brought in here? Because at that point during the introduction, they said shall be dealt with later. I want to know how it comes in, those issues of local indigenous knowledge and local solutions into this whole thing of the call. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. I think you bring in a very good point. So there's 2 ways of looking at it. When you look at it from a stakeholder consultation perspective, you can consult, and it is encouraged that you do consult your local indigenous knowledge. But in terms of the actual research as well, and what we're seeing is that all of the solutions and the SDGs themselves need to also be contextualized within a local context. So in essence, they also need to be localized to your specific environment and devise solutions for your environment. But there is a trade-off. So because you're also working with international partners, that partnership and whatever, you know, your proposal and discussions and proposed solutions, you know, to the extent possible, also need to be applicable. So you're looking at it from a community local level, how you use the indigenous knowledge in terms of your consultation process to come up with solutions, but also looking at the SDGs at a local level. So localizing the SDGs. How does this SDG fit within my context? And how do then I come up with solutions for that?
Great. We have a question from Amolo Ambole from University of Nairobi. Is each partner organization supposed to be funded by a different funding agency, or can they all be funded by Future Earth, for example?
I'm gonna ask Erica Makiba to take that one, if that's okay.
Sure, Makiba, would you like to go?
Well, they haven't heard your voice, so you go first.
No worries. So the three partner organizations, what you have to do is draw on at least 3 funding annexes. So I put a link in the chat. We have a funding table, right? And so to create a multinational funding partnership, that's why we need you to draw off of 3 of those annexes. But what I would do is create the network, the proposing consortium that you want, and look at those annexes and see where you can draw funds from. So the Future Earth Pegasus funds are eligible to all African participants. But there are other funders there that might be able to do a subaward to Africa. You need to write to the funders to ask them if that's a possibility, but it would mean collaborating with someone from that country to be able to have a subaward, right? Mm. So you can get really creative with this. But I would highly recommend, you know, thinking about what your ideal group would be. Really look at those annexes, and then at the bottom of every annex, there's a program contact, and you can reach out to them and you can say, am I eligible? Could I have a subaward? Do you like this idea? All of those questions they can legally answer for you and give you the best possible information.
I want to jump in and add, because I see this question from Dibaba, whether your collaborators need to come from a funding country. No, you can have a wider proposal that includes others who are not funded by the Belmont Forum. We've done that before, where we had Red Cross in Kenya participate. They were not funded by the Belmont Forum, but they were a critical part of the project. So you're not, if you're looking for funds, yes, you need to draw from those annexes. But if you have self-funded collaborators, they are welcomed to be a part of your project.
Thank you, Erica and Makiba. Emanuela Sibi from, you can go ahead. You had your hand up. Emmanuel? No? Okay, so we have another question coming from Shabani Soa. This is to Thabo. Why African states implement only fewer SDGs compared to developed countries according to your research? I don't know.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Why African states implement only fewer SDGs compared to developed countries according to your research?
No, it's not implement. So the research is saying that in terms of the work that's been done already, these are the SDGs that we are likely to achieve by 2030. So in the next 15 years. In terms of implementation, we are implementing all 17 SDGs. And as I had mentioned before, that the information asymmetry can play tricks with us because we know there's a lot of work going on, but it's not always easy to get that work, codify it, capture it, and report on it. So reporting on these SDGs and having the information to report is also very critical. But no, we are implementing all of the SDGs. It's just that we are falling behind on others and doing very well on others.
Thank you, Thabo. And we will take a last question. I see hands up from Amolo Ambole. I don't know if you want to ask something extra from the question that you already asked in the chat box. If you want, please go ahead.
Thank you. It's a follow-up question. So I've put there in the chat box a question about whether all the partner organizations can be from the African continent, meaning that they're funded by different agencies, but they're all from Africa.
Yeah, definitely. So that is possible. So for example, as I had mentioned, Future Earth is not the only partner that is funding Africans. I think my understanding is that, you could have someone from South Africa, you could have someone from Ghana, and you could have someone funded under Future Earth, and that would be an eligible consortia as well.